per month. So, we have professional.
It's a safe and swift conclusion to the Georgetown landfill fire. And COVID 19 has you stuck at home? Well, we've got tips to help you stay physically and mentally healthy. That's the end of news for this hour. On behalf of the entire Radio Cayman news team, thank you for listening. I'm Dion Anglin. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Radio.
Good evening. Welcome to For the Health of It. In the studio with me this evening is Miss Alex Zander Stewart. She's a psychologist. Welcome to For the Health of It.
Thanks, Tara. Thanks for inviting me on.
We'll be right back after the messages from our sponsors. Hello and welcome to For the Health of It. Miss Alex, we're going to be talking about anxiety.
Yes, and when you asked me to come on, I immediately had that feeling of shortness of breath that kind of goes along with anxiety. So that's what we're talking about today.
So, my first question to you is, what is anxiety? How do people know it's different than, say, a heart attack?
Okay. Well, anxiety and fear are words that people often put together and have them sound the same. And there are a lot of overlaps in them, that's for sure. But for the most part, anxiety is a natural body reaction to stressors in our life. And we feel it in a lot of different symptoms, and different people feel it differently. But what I mentioned was that shortness of breath. We often breathe much more shallowly when we're anxious. If we're anxious for a long time, we can feel our muscles all start to tighten up. Mm-hmm. We can feel our heartbeat often, or our heartbeat quickens. So it's those kinds of feelings that are in your body. And then there's also some mental pieces that go along with it, right? If it's extended, where we don't focus that well, we have a hard time moving away from the things we're worrying about or feeling anxious about. So there's a long list of possible symptoms. And all of us experience some anxiety. It's also, it's there to help us in a way, to remind us to, if we weren't anxious when we were taking an exam, we probably wouldn't study. If we weren't a little bit anxious about watching to make sure where the traffic was, we'd be stepping out in front of a car when it was coming. So anxiety is really there to be a friend to us, but it's when it gets carried away and it gets to be in charge that we seem to have difficulty with it.
For real. And it's good that you should say it's our friend, because as we go into these, unprecedented times of COVID-19, it's different. Maybe some other generations have experienced things like this. We've had Ebola, we've had SARS. We in Cayman haven't. They've, but now we are dealing with something that's crossed a lot of borders on here, and people are.
Yeah, it's certainly a time of uncertainty, and
Yes.
Most of us human beings don't like uncertainty. We, in fact, a lot of times when we think of anxiety, it's about us trying to control our environment, because if we feel we're in control of things, we're a little bit calmer and less anxious, right?
Yeah.
But it is a time of uncertainty, and so often when we think of anxiety, it's about anticipating what's in the future. And because we don't have some of the answers to that, we're doing our best, and we're certainly listening to places of information that are reputable, rather than, because there's all kinds of extra stuff out there that we don't need to be listening to. But there's that uncertainty for all of us. And that's part of it, what anxiety encompasses, is that uncertainty.
Yeah, like one of the coping strategies is being in the present, like right here, right now, you're okay, right?
Yeah, being able to be mindful and be present where we are, for sure.
But if you're a quite literal person like I am sometimes.
Makes you human, yes.
Yeah. You're like, how can I be present right now, but I've been told to plan for the future? And I think that's where the grappling with those two things, and of course wanting to control it with the best possible outcome for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what would you tell? I'm not going to call people control freaks, but I just did, didn't I?
You just did, absolutely.
What do you tell them?
Well, you know what? It's natural for us to want to be in control of things, because then we can relax often if we think we're in control. But so often in life we're not in control, and part of being able to deal with the unknown is recognizing that, sort of almost surrendering to the fact that we really don't have a lot of control over many things in our life. That doesn't mean we should just throw our hands up in the air and not do things we can to be helpful in this situation. But when it comes to that whole notion of wanting to control things when we're feeling anxious, it is about being able to say, how do we change our relationship with our feeling of anxiety? How do we deal with it rather than have it sort of drag us around by the nose when we start feeling anxious, like allowing it to be totally in charge. But say, hey, wait a minute, you're supposed to be here being my friend. You don't feel very friendly right now. How can I do something differently with, right?
Right.
Yeah. And there's a real paradox to this, because the more we try and push anxiety away, just imagine trying to push something away. We've actually got to focus on it to push it away. So it's somebody actually called it this when I was chatting with them about the whole idea of anxiety or worries. It's a little bit like people will refer to the elephant in the room, right? And rather than trying to chase the elephant out of the room, it's just asking the elephant to go over and sit in the corner for a little bit while we carry on with other things. Because if we do try and chase that anxiety away or totally control it, we're putting so much of our focused attention on it that we can't move away from it. We're giving it the power in many ways.
Yeah.
Right?
And with all that energy on that and stuffing it down, when the least little blip comes along.
Yeah, because we're just sort of full, right? It's right up to the edge of things. So, and a lot of these ideas often sound so simplistic, it's hard to believe that they will make a difference. And they also sound like they should be really easy, but simply being simple doesn't often mean easy. When somebody is, and we maybe need to step back a little bit, because there are different levels of anxiety, right? When anxiety is comprehensive and it's there all the time and it's interfering with our day-to-day life, that's often when we talk about an anxiety disorder, right? And being able to then go look for professional help. So if somebody is dealing with an anxiety disorder, and then we add an anxiety-provoking situation like the pandemic that we're all experiencing, that adds to things. And it's being able to say, so it's really simple to say, ask that elephant to go sit in the corner. But if your level of anxiety is already right up to the edge, that's a whole lot easier said than done.
For real. And what do you say to those people who, well, I guess they must be in contact with their
healthcare provider. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's one of the things, is being able to ask for help and acknowledge what's going on, right? Yeah.
And I mean, how do you tell parents to help their children through this time too? I mean, we won't go into this for long, but
you know what? Every one of us, there's sort of some really simple outline for each of us to deal with this, whatever our age might be. But when I think of children, one of the biggest things we can do with them is talk to them about what's going on, rather than keep this a secret or not talk about it and hope they don't hear anything about it, but talk about it at a level that they can understand and that meets their level of development. And it usually doesn't have to be a long discussion, a fairly short, simple discussion, and give them space to ask questions so that you're giving room for what they might be feeling, and not discounting if they're saying, oh, gosh, I'm feeling worried. Be able to say, well, tell me about those worries, just really being able to give them some room for it. And the other part of it is limit some of the things that may be causing them more anxiety, limit some of the news broadcasts and that sort of thing, not focus on it all the time. And we, as the adults in the room, part of our job is often to role model that we can be upset, and then we can find something to do to be able to move away from our upsetness, that it doesn't have to take up the whole space. So those are a couple of ideas.
What about senior citizens? Because this is a hell of a time for people who are older or having health conditions. I mean, they're told to self-isolate, and then connection and belonging is our natural, is something we need.
Yeah, it's part of who we are, isn't it?
Yes.
Wanting to be connected. And so often people who are elderly are already feeling somewhat isolated. And then if they're asked to do social isolation in protection of themselves, because they might be more vulnerable, they might feel like, in fact, I talked to somebody recently who was kind of saying, boy, this is awful. This is as good as it gets, kind of thing was their take. So a big piece of it, and different families. I've talked to some people who've been really creative in this way of helping their elderly family members, making a phone circle so that that person's getting several phone calls a day. They might suddenly think, well, this isn't so bad because I'm hearing from family members I haven't heard from for a while. But being in touch with people, and even if it is a phone call, at least, doing that. And if you have a group of family members, sharing in that rather than it be one person that's responsible for those phone calls. We can also do things that it isn't just a family, it might be a neighbor. Who stands outside the window and talks for a little bit, or checks to make sure, do they need groceries? I'm going to pick up some groceries. What can I pick up and leave for you? Have you got your medications? Do you need those picked up? Or can we have a delivery service bring those to you? That sort of thing. For some people, actually, one person that people keep referring to, this older group, and when I look at my birth certificate, I realize I'm in it. So we got to change that. I don't know somehow. But it's the idea of somebody said, you know what? I think I'm finally going to figure out how to use FaceTime. And so it's been, for some people, it's been a time of saying, I'm going to stretch myself and see what I can do so I can stay connected. So my brother constantly has this saying is there's a silver lining everywhere, and he really looks hard sometimes to find it. But that one, when that person said, I'm going to learn how to use FaceTime, was really a silver lining.
Yeah, and another silver lining is, I understand, and I've never been, but apparently in Venice, the canals or the sediment have settled so much that you can see the fish.
Yeah, a friend of mine just sent me that on WhatsApp the other day. I thought, things are changing. Where people are hearing the birds sing where they haven't heard them sing before.
Right.
Yeah, which is so being able to notice those things, right? Yeah.
Well, if you've tuned in, you're listening to For the Health of It. I'm talking to Alexandra Stewart. She is a psychologist, and we're talking about anxiety and coming up with strategies and coping and seeing how we can help people work around it. Or work through it, not so much
around it. Deal with it. Deal with it.
So, and you can call in if you have any questions at 1-800-534-8255, or if you want to WhatsApp me a question, my number is 925-3030. So 1-800-534-8255 or 925-3030. So, we get back to our questions.
Okay.
All right. So some people are so busy taking care of others too, that they're stressing themselves out. What would you say to them? Because there must be there's an anxiety there too. I mean, that's a control issue or no?
People do that for a lot of different reasons. When we help somebody else, it really makes us feel good, right? So there's that piece that we enjoy, the feeling of being able to help somebody else out. But if we're looking around and worrying about people, then people sort of rush in and want to take care of people. Sometimes we need to recognize that helping someone is believing that that other person can do some things for themselves. So assisting them rather than taking over and doing it for them, right, is a good thing sometimes. And it's funny, but it's the whole idea of the balance between giving and receiving. It's important to have that balance in your life. And it sort of reminds me of like a bank account. If we just give from our bank account and give and give and give, it ends up empty. And then we have nothing to give. And the same thing happens for us if we overgive. And in this time, right now, there's a lot of people concerned about other people. And I really appreciate that people are watching out for their family and their neighbors. And hopefully then they're sitting down and saying, what can I do to take care of myself so I can continue to be there?
Yeah. So we were talking about this a little bit before we went, I booked you on the show, and you were saying there's a method that people can think, it's an acronym, HALT.
Yes.
And how would it work with anxiety?
Well, one of the things for any of us, the idea of when we are hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, which when you put those together spells halt, our emotional reactions are more of a reaction. They're more right there. So if we're feeling hungry, if we've skipped breakfast and we normally have a good breakfast, or we've been taking care of somebody else so much that we skipped lunch, we're more likely to notice some of the symptoms of anxiety. We might, one of the symptoms I didn't mention at the beginning, and a lot of people don't even equate this with anxiety, but being irritable. So we might find that we've got a shorter fuse.
Yes.
Right? And so we're right now, when a lot of people are working from home or children are home from school, so there's more people around and we're having to make all those adjustments. If we're feeling particularly anxious with all those changes, we might find ourselves being more irritable with people, a little short-tempered, or stomping out of the room or something like that. Mm-hmm. So coming back to what people can do is stop and think and say, gosh, did I have my breakfast this morning? Am I feeling hungry? Am I angry about some other things that have nothing to do with my family? Am I missing my work colleagues if I'm staying at home and you're used to having that interconnection? Or am I really tired because I've been worrying and I haven't been getting a good night's sleep? Yeah. And then bringing that back to the self-care idea, right? Being able to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves around food and rest and connection.
Yeah, and when we are going through massive changes, you can grieve for what was. So that can cause, and it might, I know the grief of a lost one, you can't really equate it with, I can't pick up my coffee. But people do. They get uncomfortable.
Yes. Yeah. We are creatures of habit.
Yes.
Right? And we like to follow a routine. Mm-hmm. In fact, it's one of the things you asked about the children at home, giving them some structure can really help. And that's good for any of us in the uncertain times. But you're right. When we miss out on that, sometimes people, we've heard, we complain about our drive to work, but we sometimes actually miss it because maybe we listen to a podcast on the way in or that kind of thing. So, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we have a question. It says, it's kind of an open-ended question. Okay. What about loneliness? Like, how would you suggest that people work around their anxiety with being lonely?
With being lonely? Yeah. That's a good question, because loneliness, when we talked earlier about we human beings are meant to belong and connect. And so one of the things I would imagine with people who are self-isolating right now is feeling lonely and missing people. So it's finding different ways of being able to connect, whether it's FaceTime or video chats or telephone. And maybe even this is a time when you might get to know your neighbor, even if it's just a phone call because they're home from work and they haven't been, they're working out of their home or something like that. So you might be building some new connections if you're willing to take that stretch and phone somebody you haven't talked to for a while.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's, I go out for a walk. Because my yoga studio has been shut down for right now, which is good. It's what government needs and to make us all safe. But at the same time, I miss the camaraderie, the community. So I'm going for way more walks, smelling the flowers and hearing the birds and picking up a lot of nails on the road. And throwing them away.
So being very mindful by the sounds of things, very present when you're doing that walk. Yeah.
Yes, and meditating. I think being connected to your breath really helps in a time like this.
Yeah, our breath is fascinating because when we are anxious, most of us do a a breath that's really, really shallow, and we reduce our oxygen intake and our availability of oxygen for our bodies and our minds.
Yeah.
And so thinking about our breath and stopping every once in a while and taking a couple or 3 deep breaths, both in and out. Don't just breathe in deep and hold it. Exhale rather long as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's being able to stop and do some of those things. I automatically thought too, is something we've talked about in the past, our pets. Sometimes that sense of loneliness is, that extra walk with your dog.
Yeah.
They can be a big help in times of loneliness, without a doubt.
Yeah.
Continue to reach out if you're feeling lonely. Yeah.
I don't know if that's an option right now for elderly people. Maybe not a dog so much as a cat, but if they are more physically able to deal with a dog, maybe they could ask the Humane Society to care for a dog for a month, or shelter a dog for a month or whatever, because, they get to touch it, care for it.
Yeah, I am not sure
Yeah.
what's happening with things like the Humane Society at this time, but that always having a pet, there's even some research that shows that having a cat to pet or a dog to sit on your, by your feet can be reassuring, helps bring your blood pressure down, all kinds of good things.
So anything else? We're just about ready to end, believe it or not.
Wow, that was fast.
The anxiety. What coping mechanisms would you say for people?
Well, there's one of the things that I find really interesting, because when we're feeling anxious and we're wanting to control something, it's being able to first for ourselves acknowledge what a good job we're doing in some places in our life. We're always pretty good at criticizing ourselves. But if we can start off by noticing how well we are doing by taking care of ourselves, or congratulating ourselves for those kinds of things. And when we're looking at wanting to control or wanting to fix something, people often will say, well, look at what you can control. And that's a goodish way of approaching it. But there's also, if that's such a word,
You just said it.
just created it. There's another piece of that, and that's saying, how do you want to show up given the circumstances? What do you want to bring? Do you want to bring calm and courage? Do you want to bring compassion for others? So it's what choice do you want to, what choices do you want to make in dealing with this, rather than what can you control? Because there's a lot we can't.
Yeah.
How do we can choose who we're going to be or how we're going to show up.
That's true. I mean, you can choose to be calm, or you can choose to be a jerk.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and there are times when you might lose your cookies because you didn't sleep well, or you're angry, or you're lonely, or whatever the situation is. So
Right.
get those things in too. Take care of your needs. But I hear the music coming up. So Miss Alex, thank you for being on For the Health of It. Alexandra Stewart and I were discussing anxiety.
Yeah. Thanks, Tara. It's a pleasure being here.
Bye for now, and we are moving you to the life you want.